reading is from Luke 5, verses 1 to 11. Good morning. My name is Simon Peter. I live by the shore of a lake called Gennesaret. You might know it by another name, the Sea of Galilee. I am a fisherman, so I am strong and brave. There are many fishermen in this part of Galilee. None are as brave or strong as I am. Come, I'll show you my boat. My friends, James and John, are fishermen too. We work together, sharing the best places to fish and looking out for each other in bad weather. One night, we had been fishing all night and caught nothing. We returned to the land feeling tired, disappointed, and wet. In the morning, we sat by the shore, cleaning and repairing our nets. It's a messy job, but it must be done. At the side of the lake, we saw a crowd of people coming closer. What on earth was going on? There seemed to be someone at the front. As they came nearer, we saw who it was. It was Jesus. To my surprise, Jesus came straight up to me and asked me if he could use my boat. What did he want it for? He asked me to go a little way onto the lake so that everyone would be able to see and hear him. I did as Jesus asked, and he sat in my boat and spoke to the crowd. They listened to his words. He spoke simply, and even I could understand what he was saying. When he finished talking, he told me to take my boat further out onto the lake and begin to fish. I was amazed. All fishermen know that the best time to catch fish is at night. I told him that we'd caught nothing all night, but decided to do what he said anyway. So there I was, going out deeper, throwing around the nets, wondering why I was doing what a carpenter told me. And then the nets started getting heavier and heavier. I'd never seen them so full. I called James and John to come and help. We pulled in the fish. So many of them that both boats had started to sink. That's when I knew something wonderful had happened. There and then, in the weighed-down boat, I knelt at Jesus' feet. Lord, I said, I don't deserve you in my boat. I'm just an ordinary sinful man. Jesus told me that I needn't be afraid. Then he told me something that would change my life. Instead of catching fish anymore, he wanted me to fish for people. Me? Eventually, when we got the laden boats back to shore, I didn't care about that catch of fish anymore, because Jesus was right. And he did change my life from that very day. I left everything and followed him. And what about James and John? They followed him too.
So are you feeling brave this morning? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to do anything. You can see even the fear behind the masks. Are we all clear what our gifts are? And do we know what God really is asking us to do with our lives? And, as we've sung this morning and we've heard in the reading, are we confident enough to say yes to God? Now, the gospel reading version that Freya's just read for us tells us the first reactions to God's call. And it's, I'm not worthy. Why choose me, Lord? And we understand that being humble is a virtue, but we also need to be able to believe in ourselves because God believes in us. Simon, Peter, James, and John, they were ordinary fishermen. It is hard work. Out every night throwing nets by hand. It requires patience. It requires persistence and stamina. And perhaps these were the skills that Jesus was looking for. Hard-working, ordinary people who had patience with the crowds. Now, none of them that day would have expected Jesus to single them out for a special task. Who, me? Said Simon Peter. So Jesus showed them with the things that they would understand, using fish and nets and boats. But what did Jesus, a teacher, know about fishing? Now, every fisherman knows that you can't catch fish in the heat of the day or in the deep water. Yet here was Jesus mansplaining to an expert. Still, there was something about this Jesus. Saying yes to Jesus brought Simon Peter a reward beyond his expectations, beyond his imagination. It brought him a miracle. And no wonder then that he ended up on his knees, feeling stupid and unworthy. But Jesus didn't want him to feel ashamed. He recognized that shame comes from our fear of getting things wrong, the fear of being found out, to be found lacking. So he reassures Simon Peter, do not be afraid. And then came the real test. Would Simon Peter leave his familiar world? Would he step out of his comfort zone, and would he follow Jesus? Would he overcome the fear and let himself get caught up in God's story? Would he let go of his nets and boldly go into the deep waters? And we know the end of that story. Ordinary folk who get caught up in God's story, who went on to do extraordinary things. And here we see Jesus taking the familiar things of our lives, our skills, our experience, to use them for good purpose. Ordinary folks, ordinary lives, doing extraordinary things, all because we let ourselves get caught up in God's story and the path that he has chosen for us. Jesus said to Simon Peter, from now on, you will fish for people. And he challenges us to do the same in his name, to make a change in the world. But how do we do it? So we often hear that as Christians, part of our world, part of our role is to bring others into a relationship with Christ. But what does that look like? How do we tell the people around us about the amazing God who loves us, who is our Father, our Creator, who sent Jesus, his Son, to be our Saviour, to bring an end to our sin and suffering, without that fear of people turning away from us, criticising us, talking about us, the social media storm that could follow it, that question of, will anybody ever talk to me again? What Jesus was calling Simon Peter and us to be are evangelists. And on the face of it, that seems like a really scary thing to do, and quite dangerous in the context of our own daily lives, let alone if we were out in the wider world. So when we're asked to step out in faith, Jesus knows it seems like a daunting task, and that it may even feel impossible. Now, in my daily work, I lead a number of schools for the Diocese of Bristol. And part of what this role is so wonderful is I meet every day people who are doing the work that God has sent us to do for our communities. And as I was preparing for this service, I had an email from the Archdeacon of Bristol, the Venerable Neil Warwick, and he sends out a weekly thought. And it just struck me how positive it was for this service. So I'm going to read you his words. Jesus is clear. The most important things are to love God and to love our neighbours. Where I lived as a boy, there was a field with an orchard at the end of the road. Apple and pear trees. The orchard belonged to an old man who lived in the house at the bottom of the orchard, and we'd sneak in and scrump apples, and he'd shout at us. And we thought he was a grumpy old man, and we were all a bit scared of him. When the old man died, he left his house and the orchard to the family that lived next door to him. They weren't related to him, and it seemed a bit odd that that grumpy old man had done something for somebody else. The people in the village could not work it out. And then gradually, over time, the story came out. The family next door had taken a hot meal every single day into that man, the only hot meal that he had. They made an extra bit of dinner, just enough for him. And they did this quietly and unnoticed for every single day for over 10 years. The old man had no family and very few friends. And we can imagine that act of kindness, that act of service and love must have been a ray of light in his daily life. And he thanked them by giving them his house and his orchard. What that family did was amazing. The old man didn't seem the easiest person to love, and they were persistent in their loving kindness every day, year after year. And no one but them and that man knew the love that they were giving. Now, a wonderful story, but a real example, because that's exactly what we're called to do in our communities and in our world today. We've got a calling to reach out to others, to meet them in their own place, and to show them the love of God through our words and our actions, and through our lived lives. We don't have to stand on the international stage, because there is a way of us approaching our faith amongst our friends and acquaintances and everyone that we meet, and all with the same aim: sharing that perfect love of God. So put simply, we start by just listening. We listen to God's calling. We listen for his words and his direction, and then we begin. Now, if we look at the way that Jesus speaks, he begins a conversation. Now, we often might feel and perceive that the people we want to talk to may be so far away from us that it may not feel that we are able or sometimes worth starting a conversation. But that's the point we need to stop, because Jesus does it the other way around. He sees the people who are far off, and that means he begins a conversation. So he sees the people who are hopeless cases, and he reaches out to them, just like he reached out to me as a hopeless case, and just like he reached out to us in those times of hopelessness. And then we need to believe in the power of God. Because there has to come a point and a place where God has got to move. It doesn't matter how good a presentation we've given, until Jesus opens people's eyes and hearts, we can't move forward. So what we've got to believe is that God is moving through us in all that we do. Now, I've often heard that Christians are called to convert people, but we can't do that. That isn't our calling. Our place isn't to convert, because only God can do that. Our job is to point people to God, so that they can see through us his love, and they can start to become open to his power through the interactions that we have with them. And lastly, we need to be good witnesses to them. So when we meet with people, when we're engaged with them, when we've listened, when we've understood, when we've prayed that the power of God is at work in them, we point them to Jesus. And brilliantly, for those of us who are quite nervous about those types of conversations, you don't have to do anything overt. You don't even have to say anything. Because Jesus said, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So when we leave the service today, or when we watch the service later on YouTube, or for those of us who are on Zoom this morning, in our workings, in our daily lives, we are meant to be witnesses for Jesus. And we're meant to proclaim him at every opportunity we can. Now, it's not the easiest thing to do, to be able to proclaim Christ in all we do, but that's what we're called to do, to worship in our every action, to be the best that we can be for Jesus, and to let our light shine. And that is how we can witness for those around us, and particularly for those without a voice, where we can support those in need, to help those who need our help, where we can be there for the ones who are lost, the ones who are alone, the ones who are neglected, those who are frightened. We can be a witness and a voice for them and with them. We too, by listening, beginning a conversation, believing in the power of God and being a good witness can change lives. And through that, speak out to proclaim God's never-ending love and salvation in our broken world. So at the start of this talk, I asked you if you were feeling brave. What is God calling you to do? And what do you already do that can be used and is being used to spread the good news of God's love? And even at the times when you might feel out of your depth, the next time you hear God say, "Whom shall I send?" will you say, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." Amen.